In this lecture, we're going to discuss mowing, some of the issues that can happen in the plant, in the turfgrass plant with mowing, and then a little bit about mowing equipment. So grass really grows in spite of us. It doesn't, it survives mowing, but from, physiologically, it doesn't. It's not something that the grass really benefits from. There's a lot of negative impacts on the turfgrass plant from mowing. But the reason it works so well for some of these grass species, now it doesn't work for all grass species, just those that are adapted as turf grasses. And there might be, I think Christian's in his textbook mentions maybe 50 species that can work as turf. There might be more. There could be some that just haven't been evaluated yet. But it works because of the location of the growing point. The growing point is very protected from damage, and also from the way the leaves grow via intercalary meristems as well. So if we're going to list some of the negative effects of mowing, here's a short list. When you mow off the leaves of a plant, there's a temporary stopping of root growth that resumes, of course, but there's a delay. There's obviously a reduction in carbohydrate production because you're removing leaf material that can, through photosynthesis, produce net carbohydrates and also store some of those carbohydrates. So there's a reduction in carbohydrates overall in the plant. Wounding of the plant can oftentimes be a place for mainly diseases to enter the plant. Some diseases don't need those kind of openings to enter the plant. They can go through stomata, but some will enter through these wounds. There's also increased water loss from those cut leaf ends. And if you look at the picture at the bottom right of this slide, you'll see what happens when there's poor mowing quality. So this picture is prairie June grass. I've mentioned in other lectures that prairie June grass doesn't mow very well, and you can see these ends of the leaf tip are very frayed, and there can be a lot of water loss from those frayed leaf tips. Then overall, the water absorption by roots is reduced during this stressful period right after mowing. So of course there's some benefits in terms of what a turf is going to look like. There's increased tillering. The physiology behind that is not well understood, but there's certainly increased tillering, especially in the grasses that are more adapted for turf use. And this increased tillering leads to greater turf density. So these, the grasses that are very popular are very good at increasing density even as top growth is removed. Increased density, of course, can lead to reduced weed invasion. There are, however, differences in the types of weeds that might invade under lower mowing heights and higher mowing heights, so this is not always the case. But overall, if you have more dense turf, you're going to have a better situation in terms of weed control. Then aesthetics and playability of the turf. A lot of the function of turf requires mowing. You can think about sports fields or golf course surfaces and things. A nice uniform height of cut allows for adequate play and also just looks better. The mowing height at which you would maintain your lawn or a turf area is going to depend on a number of factors, including growth habit. Is it bunch type, rhizomatous, stoloniferous? Then the placement of that apical meristem. Where's the growth point on the crown? It's going to differ between species. So some of the grasses that aren't as well adapted to low mowing heights just have a different placement of that growing point of the crown. So in general, this list of mowing height tolerances for cool season grasses is fairly accurate. There's obviously a range for each of these, but tall fescue between 1.5 inches and 3 inches is a nice height for a lawn. You can go lower than that, but it gets quite stressed. Fine fescue for a home lawn would be 1 to 2 inches. You can go higher than that. It does lay down a little bit when you get too high. You can go much lower than that, however, on, for instance, a low-input golf course. Maybe down to below 1/2 inch, a little bit below 1/2 inch. Perennial ryegrass, 1 to 2 inches for a lawn, lower for golf course fairway. Kentucky bluegrass, same thing. And then, of course, bent grasses can go quite low. You could even get below 0.2 inches down to about 1/10 inch. However, when you get in this situation, the creeping bent grass is extremely stressed and it will need to be managed with high amounts of inputs, and then it is quite susceptible to any kind of conditions that might come on, for instance, heat stress or drought stress. There's a mowing frequency is often talked about in terms of the rule of 1/3. So this is just the idea that you should never cut off more than 1/3 of the leaf blade on a grass plant at any one mowing. If you cut off more than that, you could stress it to a point where you lose turf. So when you maintain a higher mowing height, your mowing frequency can be reduced. And when you maintain a lower mowing height, for instance, a golf green, your mowing frequency is greatly increased. So, for instance, on a golf green, golf course superintendents might need to mow their golf greens every day. Fairway maybe 3 times a week, and then a golf course rough where the higher mowing heights might be once a week, depending on the conditions. So scalping is the great risk of mowing grasses shorter than they're adapted. And scalping is just when there's too much top growth taken off, and that's when you see quite a bit of damage due to mowing. So some factors that would affect the frequency would include, of course, species and how fast those shoots are growing, those turfgrass leaves are growing. And the growth rate is going to depend on a number of things, and they're mostly environmental conditions. So if there's more nitrogen, more water, more ideal temperatures, those kind of things, you're going to have faster vertical growth rate. Obviously, cutting height's going to affect frequency. So like I just mentioned, lower mowing heights are going to need more frequent cuttings, and vice versa for the high mowing heights. And then turf use. Obviously, there's different uses of turf and different requirements. And then, of course, species is going to also affect this. So some species just can't be mowed to the same heights as other species, and that's going to affect frequency of mowing as well. So when you mow too often, this is a list of things that could happen. So increased shoot density, which is a good thing, but you're going to have overall decreased carbohydrates, which could lead to some problems with energy in the plant, decreased root development, decreased rhizome development in some situations because there's not enough energy in the plant to continue this lateral growth. Decreased shoot growth due to stress, and then of course decreased chlorophyll, which is going to feed back into decreased carbohydrate production. So the scalping situation, when you remove too much green tissue, and sometimes when you can even damage the crown, you get so low that the crown is damaged. And if the crown is damaged, it's obviously a big problem because that's where all the growth of the plant comes from. When you remove too much green tissue, you get a browning and dying of the turf. So in this picture on the left, you can see a bent grass. I believe this is colonial bent grass. You can see some disease in here. This is brown patch, but mostly this is pretty healthy colonial bent grass. This might be cut at about 1/8 of an inch. Next to it is some hard fescue cut at 1/8 of an inch. So you can see that the 1/8 of an inch is below the acceptable mowing height for hard fescue. And this kind of browning is very characteristic when you have a situation where you're getting scalping. So there's a number of things that can contribute to scalping. One is, of course, mowing too low. But then if you mow on irregular contours where there's hills and things, your mower blade can be lower than it's supposed to be. When you wait too long between mowings and end up taking more than the 1/3 or 30 or 40% of the leaf tissue, that's also a problem. And then situations where there's a lot of thatch, and we'll talk about thatch in another lecture, but thatch sometimes moves the crown of the plant. Sometimes the crown of the plant will move into the thatch, and that can cause damage as well. Grain is another consequence of some mowing regimes. So this grain is when all the leaf blades in a turf lay the same direction. So it's a problem in golf with creeping bent grass, and it affects ball roll. And the solution to this would be altering mowing patterns, doing some cultivation, things like that. But that is one thing that can happen when mowing patterns are not changed. So this just shows, how you might be able to reduce this, alleviate this. And in fact, grain can be quite hard to remove if it's there's been situations where on golf courses might have grain that's really impossible to change just because over time the mowing patterns haven't been changed enough or whatever. There might be other genetic reasons in the grass plant. In that variety of grass, the grain just persists and they can't get rid of it. So it's quite difficult. So if this is an issue with the creeping bentgrass on a golf course, superintendents often are going to change mowing patterns. So clippings do not contribute to thatch, which is oftentimes thought by most people. So there's really no reason to remove them unless they affect the use of the turf, or if they're excessive clippings and they could, for instance, clump up and reduce photosynthesis and things like that. If there's a lot of clippings in the fall, they can contribute to disease development during the winter, especially snow mold. So removing clippings in the fall is probably a good idea, the late fall. But otherwise, you can leave them on there because as those clippings decompose, they contribute nitrogen and other nutrients to the turf, and some estimates say up to 2 pounds per 1,000 square feet per year can be added to a turf when clippings are returned. Okay, now we'll just briefly go through the two primary types of mowers. There's reel mowers and rotary mowers, and these are explained in Christian's book. So in a reel mower, there's a reel that spins against a bed knife. So several blades spinning and then spinning against the bed knife. And when the grass leaf is found between the bed knife and the reel, there's a cutting action there and it clips off. These are used in more professional situations. They result in a much cleaner cut, and one of the drawbacks would be expense related to machine maintenance. They're a lot more work to keep up, a lot more adjusting to do to get a good cut. Rotary mowers, most people have used these, just a single blade spinning on a vertical shaft. The grass blades get lifted up due to the spinning of the blade, creating a vacuum effect. These obviously are very cheap, easy to find, easy to use. They are quite dangerous, however, with these side discharge units where body parts, if you're oftentimes hands can get too close to the leaf blade, to the mower blade, and there's a lot of people who've had significant injuries from rotary mowers. But just through the cost of maintenance and the cost of the product, rotary mowers are very popular. The first mower was called Bunning's machine, named after the inventor. This is really just a reel mower, just a primitive form of a reel mower. Now, of course, we use these rotary mowers, as you can see here, with the side discharge. Very popular, but the cut is certainly not as clean as some of these reel mowers. You can also purchase reel mowers that are not powered, where they're just walk behind. That they're becoming more popular now, and they produce a pretty good cut. Here you can see a riding unit reel mower. Here's a close-up of what the reel and bed knife system looks like. So you can see these reels, they spin, and then you can see the sharp edge of the bed knife, and as the grass blade comes between these rotating reels and the bed knife, they get clipped off. So the quality of cut here depends on the sharpness of all these blades and then adjustments. So the turf manager needs to adjust very finely finally adjust the height of this bed knife and make sure that the distance between, or the gap between where this reel spins and where the distance from this bed knife, make sure that that's the right distance for the height of cut that they desire. Here's a larger riding unit that has 3 reel decks on it, and these would be used on large turf areas where reel mowing is necessary, such as a fairway. And then there's walk behind units as well for golf greens. So the adjusting and sharpening of blades is quite important. You can see this leaf blade on the right is showing some dead tissue due to poor mowing quality. So if a mower cuts off the leaf blade cleanly, you don't see this kind of senescence at the end of the leaf. And not only so this can be a place for more water loss, but it's just aesthetically, it just doesn't look good. So when this happens, you really reduce the benefits of mowing. You get a turf that has kind of a whitish appearance, and it doesn't look very good. This is the end of the lecture on mowing.